Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. You're watching In Deep on the Delta, and today we're going to be talking about pace and angle. We're going to talk about the pace of the boat, how quickly it's moving down the bank, and we're also going to talk about the angle of retrieve on your bait. Now, I am grouping pace and angle in the same video because the pace that you move down the bank is going to oftentimes dictate the angle that you are going to be retrieving your bait, and the angle that you retrieve your bait back to the boat is critical. I don't care if you're tournament angling or you're just trying to catch a few fish. That angle in which your bait comes back to the boat and how you calculate each one of your casts and bring that cast through the strike zone to your boat is extremely critical, and we're going to cover that right now. And we'll start with pace. And I use the word pace because I don't like to use the word speed. When I talk about the speed that you move your boat down the bank, especially novice anglers think they have to put that trolling motor on 10 and move down as quickly as they can. Pace to me means more moving down the bank as quickly as you can, but you have to be efficient with the baits that you are using, and you have to cover the water efficiently. Now, a professional angler can move down a bank very quickly and cover water very efficiently. A novice angler, you've got to work on this. It's time on the water, some of it's casting, some of it's how fast you can calculate, you know, where your spots are and what bait you're using, and how fast you need to fish that bait through a particular spot. So your pace is going to, well, number one, pace will be different for every fisherman. The more experienced fisherman you become, the faster your pace is going to become, and the faster your pace is, the more water you're going to be able to cover, and that's all going to calculate into more fish for you. So let's talk about a few things that dictate your pace, and obviously it's how fast you're going on with your trolling motor, or maybe if you're a kayaker, how fast you're paddling. If you're here on the Delta, your pace can be affected by a tide. If you are on a power generating lake where it has locks that open and close to generate the power, that's man-made current that's going to affect your drift. Wind, obviously, of course, is going to affect your drift anywhere you are, and that's going to be something that mechanically you're going to have to control. We'll talk a little bit about that, but you'll have to either, you know, roll with the wind, facing your bow into the wind. There's lots of things that we can talk about to control how fast you are actually moving up and down the bank, or your pace. Now, the other two things that you have to consider when it comes to pace are your baits. Do you have a fast moving bait like a buzz bait on, or do you have maybe a frog or a worm that you have to slow down a little bit? And again, when we talk about pace, if we are fishing a 100-yard section of bank, your pace may change over that 100-yard section of bank. When you are in a prime target zone, you may be throwing, let's just say, a worm where you have to slow down a little bit. After you get out of that prime target, well, I hope I don't get crashed here. We're going to let this plane go by. Happens every video, believe me. Okay, so we're talking about pace. We've got a 100-yard section of bank. We are not going to be moving at the same speed down that 100-yard section of bank, and this is what separates really good fishermen or tournament anglers from maybe what we'll call the weekend anglers. You can take that same 100-yard section of bank, and let's just say on this particular day it's going to take 15 minutes to fish that piece of bank. A very experienced angler may spend 90% of his time on that bank in just the prime locations, and he will be blowing by or fishing very quickly over the locations that may not be holding as many fish. An inexperienced angler will get on that bank and he'll turn his he or she may turn their trolling motor on or paddle down the bank at the same pace, fishing through the hot spots and the dead spots and giving them the same amount of time, and that is not fishing efficiently. And I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but I think as we find a bank here that I can go down and actually show you guys some demonstrations of what I'm talking about, you'll start to understand this. So the speed that you're moving down the bank is going to really dictate the angle that you're throwing your baits. The faster you drift, it's easier to throw a fast-moving bait. If you're throwing a slow-moving bait like a frog, you have to slow your drift down, or your pace down a little bit, and in order to throw those baits efficiently. So I'm going to pull up and see if I can find a little place here out of the wind and explain, as we go down a bank, what we're looking for and what's going to dictate your pace, and how your baits are also going to play into that piece of the puzzle as you're moving at the proper speed for the proper bait. Let's give this a try. Okay, I think I picked the wrong day to demonstrate pace and angle. A little bit too much wind to actually go out and slow everything down enough to where I think I can give you guys a good idea of what's going on. So I'm pulled in here out of the wind a little bit. I guarantee you, or I promise you, I will do another video when the wind is down and I can go out to some tule banks and some islands, maybe fish some rock and tule, and demonstrate how I like to move down the bank and the pace that I like to fish, and some do's and don'ts. Now, the biggest biggest problem that I see inexperienced anglers having is dragging a bait behind the boat. So if in the case that we're in right now, let's just say we're going down the bank, I've got my nose pointed down the bank, and we're going to be moving down the bank, I want to be throwing ahead of the boat, always at the proper angle. Now, that proper angle is going to change, because as I said before, if we're using a buzz bait, you can throw that right into the bank and burn it back to the bank, or excuse me, burn it back to the boat fairly quickly, and have a good angle with your line, and the proper you're going to be able to get the proper action out of that buzz bait. Now, if I'm throwing a frog, and let's just say I'm moving down the bank, or a worm, I have to contend with a slower moving bait, and a slower moving bait is going to do a number of things. I could throw that out, and as the boat goes down the bank, I'm going to have line drag, and I'm going to have a situation where I can't work that bait effectively. If I'm throwing a bait like a spinner bait, or a jerk bait, or even a buzz bait, and I am moving too fast, it's going to roll over, or I'm going to get a big bow in that line, and you cannot effectively and efficiently move those baits. So what you have to do in a case like that, instead of throwing the bait directly to the bank, you're going to have to throw it at an angle in front of the boat, because as I throw in front of the boat, I am moving the boat towards my bait. So I have a direct angle from the tip of my rod to my bait, and then I can manipulate whatever bait that I have, whether it's a frog or if it's a worm and I have to let it set down there and soak. The boat is moving towards the bait. Now I have to adjust how much line and bow is in that line. I have to keep my rod tip down towards the water, and I have to continually adjust that bow in the line, but I can get a much better angle throwing it in front of the boat and moving the boat to the bait and operating the bait than I can throwing right into the bank, having the boat pass my lure, and then try to bring it back with that big bow in the line. And remember, when you have that bow in the line, you can, let's say you're fishing a spinnerbait. You've all had that big bow in the line where the spinnerbait rolls over. Or if you have a buzz bait and you've got a big bow in the line in the wind, it'll fall over on its side. Same thing with a jerk bait. It doesn't come back and operate the way that it should. And that's because of the angle that you're fishing the bait back to the boat. So that is super, super important, to get that bait out in front of the boat and work it back to the boat on a straight line. And that way, if a fish bites, you have the ability to set the hook the way it should be set, and you also have the ability to manipulate that bait properly. So while the wind's blowing and I can't move around a lot here, let's talk about thinking about pieces of the puzzle as you're moving down the bank that you have to put together in order to fish at an efficient pace for yourself. It is super important to be able to learn key holding places on any given bank. And let's just say a 100-yard section of bank, maybe there's only 4 or 5 really high percentage spots. So as you're moving down that bank, you want to focus on those high percentage spots. You may also have some maybe places that aren't so high percentage, but they're good looking water. You want to cover that. And then there's going to be some water that you don't want to cover. So when it comes to the pace of fishing that bank, you're going to fish quickly through the low percentage spots, and when you come up to a high percentage spot, you want to make sure that as you're moving down here, you know where that high percentage spot is, and you're not going to be passing it up and then trying to throw back to it and dragging your bait. And we've all done that. We'll be running down the bank and we'll see this little inlet, maybe in the tules or a rock or something, and you see it a little bit late, and then all of a sudden the boat's passing, you say, oh, I got to throw back to get in there, and the minute the bait hits, the boat's already dragging the bait out of the water. That's one of the reasons we don't want to throw behind the boat. We want to be able to come down this bank and really keep one eye way ahead of the bank so that we know those prime spots, and we know when we're coming up to that prime spot. And I want to talk about, let's just for the sake of demonstration, that little area out there that has that vegetation matted up there, let's just say that's a really prime spot. I want to be able to hit that spot while I'm moving to it, and I hit it while my bait's in front of the boat. That way I can slowly take a frog or whatever I'm working and move it right back to the boat. If I saw that as being a prime place too late and the boat is already past it, what I don't want to do is look back and cast to that and then have my bait drag out of there. And again, if it's a spinner bait or a buzz bait or something, if you get that big bow in the line where you're dragging it back, it's going to roll over, it's going to lay on its side, it's not going to track right. If it's a crank bait, if it's a worm, you're not going to be able to soak it. So always keep an eye on your prime spots, and not only keep an eye on them, but once you throw in a prime spot and you think that there's maybe a circle of 3 or 4 feet that's a prime spot, work it through that prime area. If you don't get bit, burn that bait back, catch it in the air, and put it to the next prime area. And that again is a key to your own pace. As you are able to control your cast, you get a feel for your rod and reel, pull it out of the prime spot. Don't work the bait all the way back to the boat. Get that bait in quickly, get control of it, and move it to the next spot down the bank. And that will make you much more efficient. Being more efficient, you're going to cover more bank, and you're going to cover it at the right pace, and you'll catch more fish. And there are days when we all go out, myself included, I'm thinking, man, I'm just not fishing very well today. I don't know what it is. I can't cast. I can't, I'm not getting any bites. I don't have control of the bait, so on and so forth. That's because whether it's me, whether it's you, we are not fishing at our pace. Maybe it's because you want to go out there and get that first bite and you're blowing down the bank too fast. Maybe it's because you're tired and you're not fishing fast enough. Whatever it is, you're not fishing at the right pace. So I'm sorry I couldn't do a little more today, but we'll, like I said, we'll do another video, and we'll get on one of these rock banks that has a bunch of tule on it, and maybe a tule island, and we'll talk about how to move down that bank and the angles that we want to fish tule islands and little inlets and things. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the water.